Hey, this is Trevor Airdrie with Sports Express Magazine for a very special 10 Questions with Trevor Airdrie. My guest at this time is a legendary MMA announcer, Mauro Ranallo. Thank you for joining us.
Wow, I owe you a few loonies for that one. Thank you for the intro.
All right, so my first question is, why did you get into broadcasting? How old were you when you got into broadcasting?
I was very fortunate at a young age. I can remember being 4, 5, or 6, and being very attracted to the sounds of the voices I heard on radio. And back in the 70s, the 3-channel universe, I was always very immersed in the storytelling and the broadcasters and those who described sporting events or announced the news. And I truly believe we're all given a path in this life. I think all of us have our own gifts, and I was just very fortunate and blessed to know at a very young age that mine was communication. I wanted to be an entertainer. I wanted to be a broadcaster, and really, I didn't even know where I would fit. I wanted to cover the whole gamut, and so at a very young age, that's what I envisioned. I visualized it without knowing it at the time, and was very fortunate to be discovered at the age of 16 in high school, and my professional career began at a very young age.
Okay, so what our listeners or what our readers don't know is that Mauro Ranallo started with All-Star Wrestling. Then he made the jump over to Calgary Stampede Wrestling. How did you become affiliated with Calgary Stampede Wrestling, and what was your favorite moments there? Yeah,
well, as you mentioned, I was discovered by a promoter named Al Tomko in my high school, WJ Mode in Abbotsford, British Columbia, as a ring announcer. I was actually a high school wrestler. We'd done a tournament at Simon Fraser University. There was a pro wrestling show at the gym to raise money for the football team. Having been raised a huge pro wrestling fan, my parents came over from Italy, not knowing the language, and of course pro wrestling, very easy visual to understand, the black hat, white hat, good, bad, especially back then, not so much today perhaps. And so I got hooked immediately into the theatrics, the athleticism, and again, the pomp and pageantry. So at 16, I was able to do some ring announcing at my gym. The promoter, Al Tomko, liked what he heard. For the next 3 years, I was on nationwide television on a weekly basis from 16 to 19, working for All-Star Wrestling. And a tape was given by a friend of mine, Richard Berger, to the Hart family, the legendary family who started Stampede Wrestling. And Bruce Hart, who was the booker for the halcyon days of the promotion, brought me in when they resurrected the promotion back in 1999, and I worked for Stampede Wrestling doing their television shows for a year, working with the real legendary Bad News Allen, who was Bad News Brown in World Wrestling Federation at the time. So I became immersed in the Hart family. I dated Jim Neidhart's daughter, Jenny, for 3 years, and I became very close to the family, and to this day, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met is the late, great Stu Hart and his wife Helen. So Stampede Wrestling, the majority of the memories, because the promotion was very green. A lot of rookies coming up, but I mean, I got to announce Harry Smith and TJ Wilson, who's now, of course, Tyson Kidd in WWE, Natalia, the diva, who's Natalie Neidhart. I had the opportunity to cover Jack Evans, Teddy Hart, so a lot of young guys, but most of the memories were just listening to the stories that Stu Hart regaled me with regarding the entire history of the business.
All right. And how did you make the jump from pro wrestling to MMA?
Well, I did, I covered every sport imaginable from in my early teens to adulthood. I was the first, play-by-play announcer for Muay Thai on national television on TSN. I did the pro wrestling. I was a junior hockey announcer for many years. High school football, high school basketball. MMA was always a huge love of mine. I mean, it was just a natural transition from the pro wrestling aspect, especially what Pride Fighting Championships was doing in Japan, where it spawned from the pro wrestling mentality in terms of the marketing aspects and the matchmaking. Still very legit form of competition. In 2001, I had the pleasure of meeting El Guapo Boss Rutan in Vancouver at a grappling meet, and we ended up doing a very low-budget film together, and the experience of working with him on this movie spawned a lifelong friendship, and he in fact said that if he had the opportunity to work with me again, he would, and true to his word, when an opportunity arose with Pride Fighting Championships in 2003, he recommended me to the promotion. I sent a demo tape of a Muay Thai fight that I had announced for TSN. Didn't even get an interview. I received an email saying, would you be able to come to Japan in October of 2003 for the first Bushido event? Checked my calendar, wasn't too busy, and thus spawned a 3-year career with Pride Fighting Championships, which encompassed 31 events and without a doubt the greatest time of my career.
Okay. Jumping from pro wrestling, which is scripted, to MMA, which is unscripted, How different is it to announce pro wrestling to MMA?
You know what, and this is why, you know, people either love me or hate me. I announced pro wrestling when I did pro wrestling. I was very fortunate while I was at the Fight Network to do Pro Wrestling Noah, which is a different style of pro wrestling than North Americans are used to, the Japanese strong style, in which they incorporate a lot of MMA maneuvers and, you know, the psychology of real sport. So I actually approached pro wrestling at the time as a commentator, as a sport, even though it is showbiz and whatnot. I tried to call the moves. I tried to inject real sports terms and analogies. So I didn't find it very difficult. And in fact, in MMA, you know, it's still entertainment first and foremost. And I'm as excited about calling the fights cage side as I am watching them at home. And again, people, you know, not necessarily everyone likes my style, and that's fine. That just shows me that I'm not vanilla and I'm Neapolitan when it comes to flavors. I just found it to be a natural transition, and there's nothing I enjoy more than being cage side and calling fights live.
Okay. So, going back to Bas Rutten, he played a little practical joke on you.
A little one, yeah.
With Mirko Cro Cop, who was, at the time, one of the most devastating strikers ever to fight in MMA. Was that the scariest moment in your career? Was it the funniest moment in your career?
Well, it's you run a gamut of emotions, and just and, you know, thanks for bringing that up, because it is a very unique experience. That was my third event. I'd been brought in for Bushido 1 in October. They liked what they heard. They actually signed me to a 2-year contract shortly thereafter. I did the Shockwave 2003 event, and then in February I returned for the Mirko Cro Cop versus Ron Waterman fight. And back at the time, Bas Rutten and I would take turns. Like, he would interview one of the athletes, I'd interview the opponent. And because Mirko had that aura, and you're right, one of the most devastating strikers ever to compete in MMA, and at the time, I mean, he was just making the move from K1, and it was, you know, the right kick, hospital, left kick, cemetery was in full effect, and he had this aura. He didn't seem to be a guy who you wanted to mess with or even joke around with. So he, you know, intimidated me a little bit, and I wanted to make sure I'm doing a good job. So I said, "Boss, you mind, I'll interview Waterman, you interview Cro Cop. It's just, you know, I want to get my bearings about me. I have no problem doing it, but if you don't mind," he goes, "Sure, no problem, more." Of course, immediately El Guapo went into going, okay, this is how we're going to initiate this guy. So we're on our way to do the interviews, and he's like, "Mauro, sorry, man, I forgot. I interviewed Waterman. You got to interview Cro Cop." I said, "All right, no worries." And again, if you check it out on YouTube, you saw what happened. Without a doubt, at the time, I literally thought my career was over. I thought, this can't be happening to me. It's just, my dream job is quickly turning into a nightmare. But in hindsight, what it showed was the first time that Mirko actually showed a different side of his personality, and the respect for Bas Rutten just to do it, with the smiling. And it's interesting because even since then, he's never been one, you know, he doesn't like going to press conferences, doesn't like doing a lot with the press, but after that, every time we saw each other at events or you know, walking in behind you know, under the bowels of the arena during fight time, he'd always wink and give me a fist bump. So it kind of brought us closer together, and it's something, you know, I'm very now proud to be a part of. I think it is hilarious in hindsight, but at the time, yeah, I wasn't enjoying it too much.
Okay. And what was your favorite event that you've ever watched or called?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and you know, it truly is very difficult to answer, but I always go back to Bushido 9, the tournament in September of 2005, where I think top to bottom, one of the most amazing cards in terms of action. We had Takanori Gomi fighting in 2 Fight of the Year candidates. The fight with you know, Tatsuya Kawajiri, his compatriot, that had been long hyped and was just amazing. And then the rematch with Luis Azeredo in the main event, which is just phenomenal. And there were so many other terrific fights that night that I encourage anyone who's an MMA fan to check out Bushido 9, the tournament. But I think the matchup between Mirko Cro Cop and Fyodor Emelianenko, August 2005, for the heavyweight titles, you know, many of my critics even call it one of the best calls they've ever heard, and it ranks right up there. And of course, Kevin Monster Randleman. I mean, it's interesting how Mirko Cro Cop and I are very much connected in my career. Cro Cop getting knocked out in the opening round of the heavyweight tournament, you know, probably my signature call. Randleman suplexing Fyodor Emelianenko on his head, which was amazing. And then, of course, you know, got to give myself a little bit of credit. Quinton Rampage Jackson power bombing Ricardo Arona seconds after I said that's what was going to happen. So you know, I've been very blessed, very fortunate, and there have been so many memories and many more to come.
All right. If you could be a fantasy booker and you could put together 2 fighters, any weight class, who would it be?
Bas Rutten and Vanderlei Silva in their primes at 205.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what was the best moment of your career, like either professional, like, you know, on the sidelines, like what was the best moment of your career?
Yeah, man, you know, it's a promo that we've run on the Score television network, and it's so true, and I think that's one of the reason I do have some haters, is because it's purely that I am living the dream. I wish everyone could, and you know, instead of hating, they should almost take an example of me. I suffer from bipolar affective disorder. I've been very open with that. Depression half my life. And for me to continue to be functional and employed at the highest level should serve as, I hope, inspiration to others. But for me, just the fact that I get to do what I love for a living is the absolute biggest highlight. But I would have to say again, just working with Boss Rudin during what was the glory days of MMA, not just Pride, but MMA and you know, the roster and all the guys who went on to the UFC. I mean, the UFC is the ultimate now, part of the pun, the biggest juggernaut. But to be I've said this once and I continue to say it, I wish everyone who's an MMA fan would have had a chance to be at Saitama Super Arena between 2003 2006 for what we experienced. It was a Super Bowl every event. Just imagine that. And so I think my Pride tenure, the fact that Showtime brought me in for the first you know, American premium cable network coverage of MMA. How can I forget CBS allowing the small town kid from Abbotsford, British Columbia, to be a part of the first broadcast team on major network TV, hosting Canada's first MMA television show. I'm just, you know, I'm continuing to live the dream. So every day is a blessing for me.
Fair enough. And lastly, like, when Strikeforce was bought out by Zuffa, is the UFC on your horizon?
It's funny, a lot of people ask that, and first of all, I have nothing but respect for what the UFC has done, and the commentators, Mike Goldberg, Joe Rogan, now John Anik and Kenny Florian. I'm under contract with Showtime Sports. Never was employed by Elite XC or Strikeforce. I'm a contract employee under Showtime Sports, so I cover events for them, and I've done M1 Challenge. The UFC, to me, to be honest with you, I love the way it is right now, where I get to still cover the sport as a journalist. I'm a talk show host daily in the MMA Show podcast, again the MMA Show, and I get to call fights on a professional level. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? I'm okay with the way it is right now, to be honest, but I definitely would love to just keep calling the fights at the highest level. I call Score Fighting Series as well, and I'm a fan of the grassroots level too. Just because I've been to Pride and I've been to Strikeforce, I like covering guys who are having the professional debuts as well. So if I can continue to call fights for a living, I'll be happy no matter where it is.
Okay, perfect. And the last question on this interview is, where can our readers see you now? Sure.
Well, again, I don't mean to give you the New York phone book, but Monday to Friday, the MMA Show podcast is on thescore.com. The first 30 minutes airs live video stream. The entire show is on iTunes or radio.thescore.com/live. And I mean, every day we bring it with the biggest and brightest names in MMA. Wednesday nights on the Score, the MMA Show TV side, 3:30 Eastern, 6:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific. And of course, you can catch me calling Strikeforce and other MMA events on Showtime in the United States.
Okay, thank you very much, Mauro, for your time.
Thanks for the questions.
And that was the first issue of 10 Questions with Trevor Airdrie.